will be joining us as soon as they arrive from the southern end of the Gold Coast. So at this point in time, we'll just note that they're running a little bit behind time, but we won't move any apologies. They should be here before the meeting concludes. So we've got start items, confirmation of minutes. Are there any other start items that anyone wants to unstar? Councillor Vorster.
Mr Chairman, just on 6.2, I think Productive Gold Coast has some input from Bond University and Griffith and what have you. I haven't made a declaration in the past concerning this, as you know, I don't view that there's any interest that my wife has in the outcomes of this report. So I just wanted to flag that. If anyone has an issue, I suppose we can deal with it. Otherwise, we can leave it at start.
Okay. Councillor Tozer. 6.11. Councillor Gates.
Chairman, I need to make a declaration on 6.2, so Productive Gold Coast, just due to the planning consultant, and on 6.10. So, yes, those two, please.
Councillor Hamel.
Mr Chairman, one of either 6.5, 6.6, 6.7, 6.8 or 6.9. I'm just wondering, the officers have got a presentation, a very quick presentation, but I'm not sure on which actual one of those they were planning on doing it on. Do we know? Doesn't matter. Then if we can unstar 6.5 and the rest can remain starred.
Why don't we just unstar
Do you want to
all of them?
do of it all?
And then we can move them as a bundle.
Done.
Might be better.
Yeah.
You're the boss in teal.
It's green and blue.
Okay, going well with the stars so far. So let's move the confirmation of minutes as a start item, 6.3 as a start item. Did we want to star 6.4? Did anyone have any questions about that? 6.4, floodplain. Yeah, TLPI continuation.
Councillor May.
Okay, we'll add a star to that. Someone like to move those start items? Moved by Councillor Peter Young, seconded by Councillor Vorster.
Also, and I've mentioned this before, my parents own a unit within the Gurrungumbar floodplain, but can't redevelop it because they're in a community title scheme. So just want to flag that if there are any concerns again. Otherwise, yeah, happy to move it.
Okay. So start items, take the vote. All in favour? Against? Carried. All right, item 6.1. Yep. Let's do conflicts of interest. Councillor Gates.
A declaration in relation to 6.2. Place Design is the consultant appointed by Council for the policy preparation on Productive Gold Coast. I received $1,410 in 2011, $1,850 in 2014 and $1,850 in 2016, which was refunded in full. I'd like to remain in the room and participate in the debate. I've had no contact with the consultant in relation to the item, but recognise the importance in informing city plan into the future.
Councillor Vorster.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I'm happy to move that Councillor Gates may participate in the decision despite the Council's conflict of interest, because the public interest is served on this significant public policy position only with the insight and experience that Councillor Gates can offer.
Goodness me.
Deputy Mayor.
Without the extra apostrophe itself. Put it over the edge.
Mr Chair, could I second that, please? you like to speak to it?
Favour, Division, Councillor Hamill, Councillor Jones, Councillor Young, Councillor Forster, Councillor Caldwell. Against, Councillor Gates did not vote.
Thank you, Chairman. And the second one relates to 6.10. And this one was a long, long time ago, 2008. I received $1,000 from BC Curry Surveys, who are mentioned in the report. They're the town planners and surveyors for the project, and $4,170 in 2011. I'm seeking permission to participate due to the length of time, 13 years and 10 years respectively, and the community interest being served by my participation.
Should be the RBL clause. If you're still in primary school, you don't have a conflict.
Excuse me. Nor secondary.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I'm happy to move that Councillor Gates may participate in the decision despite the Council's conflict of interest, because no reasonable person
Do you know when he gave me $4,000?
could form the view there is a conflict between the interests of the donor and the public interest, given the quantum of the donation and the significant time that has elapsed. I might have just watched a Bond film.
Three. Did you? Have you? Which Bond film was it?
Quantum of Solace. and then followed by No Time to Die. Did you watch that one?
I've watched them both, I think, but I can't remember.
Oh, there you go.
29.
That's how
Councillors, we've got a
He's now
short
37.
presentation from Councillor Gates. Come on. We've got a presentation from Lara, if anyone would like to hear that. It relates to item 6.1 about superseded applications. Is everyone interested? Good, let's listen.
All right, through the chair, good morning, councillors. Roger, Di and I will be presenting on requests to apply a superseded planning scheme. I'd also like to introduce Michael Leong in the corner here, our partner at Cause Chambers Westgarth. Michael will assist with questions following our presentation. So with the adoption and commencement of City Plan version 9 imminent, it's timely that Council reviews the legislative requirements pursuant to the Planning Act and planning regulation in relation to accepting, assessing and deciding superseded planning scheme requests. As the slide indicates, version 9 of City Plan, when version 9 of City Plan commences, the current version 8 will become superseded. A superseded planning scheme request can be lodged by an applicant 12 months from the commencement date of the new scheme. A request may be lodged because under the new planning scheme, an application may now require a higher level of assessment, for example, code to impact assessment, or the requirements of the relevant code are now different and the applicant may wish for the application to be assessed and decided under the superseded planning scheme. The planning regulation states the local government must decide whether or not to agree to a superseded planning scheme request within 30 business days after the request is received. Importantly, agreeing to a superseded planning scheme request does not mean the city is agreeing to approve the subsequent development application. Rather, it agrees to assess a development application against the superseded planning scheme. Due to timeframe constraints, it is proposed that requests to apply a superseded planning scheme will be decided under delegated authority. They will, however, be sent to the divisional councillor for their information. Section 29 of the Planning Act does not contain any guidance for a local authority to consider in deciding a superseded planning scheme request. To encourage good, consistent and transparent decision-making, it is proposed that council should adopt criteria officers would use for internal assessment. The criteria proposed being 1, the relevant provisions of the Planning Act; 2, all written information provided by a person to enable council to properly assess the request; 3, whether the application of the superseded planning scheme may result in a planning outcome that is not in the public interest; and 4, whether refusing the request may expose council to a real risk of a potential compensation claim. To manage the risk of compensation claims, it is proposed that the general approach will be to approve the superseded planning scheme requests for the 12-month period. This will also result in a streamlined process for documenting and reporting on the superseded planning scheme requests. Once a superseded planning scheme request is decided, a decision notice must be given to the applicant within 5 business days. The applicant must then lodge a development application within 6 months of the decision date, and the application is assessed against version 8 of City Plan. I'll hand over to Rog to talk about the compensation.
Thanks, Lara. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm going to be briefly talking about compensation and how that fits in with a superseded planning scheme process. If council refuses an application for a request to have their application assessed under the superseded planning scheme, this potentially does give rise to compensation if council refuses the request. And the reason being is that there's a change to the planning scheme instrument that gives rise to a potential adverse outcome for an applicant who has an interest in the land. So where this could happen is say in Palm Beach, where currently version 8 we have 29-storey height limit and an application, and then version 9 comes in, which will be the new planning instrument, where there's a reduction in height. Now the applicant then lodges their superseded planning scheme request to have their building assessed under version 8 at 29 metres. If council refuses that request, the applicant will then be forced to lodge their application under version 9. And as the relevant planning instrument has changed, it is likely that the scenario will be that council refuses that application. So if that happens, the applicant can take that to mean that there's been an adverse consequence as a result and a change to the planning scheme instrument. Based on the Planning Act, they're actually able to make a claim for compensation that they've been adversely impacted in that. So in a nutshell, because of that significant risk of compensation, it is actually one of the criteria that officers will use to assess applications under the superseded planning scheme, to such an extent that it is our opinion that the majority of requests for applications to be assessed under the superseded planning scheme should be supported. And to give you some context, when we went through this exercise in 2016 as a result of the 03 planning scheme change, where we went to the city plan, we had approximately 400 requests for superseded planning scheme applications, and of those 400, we actually supported 397 of them. The 3 that we didn't were just simply very poorly made applications where there was insufficient information for council to actually make a proper decision. So, in a nutshell, it's our, I suppose, recommendations to you today that the 4 criteria that we've got are the criteria that we use to assess applications for superseded planning schemes, because of the real threat of compensation. Are there any questions on compensation?
Councillor Peter Young.
Thanks, Chairman. Through you.
In the circumstance, or the example that you gave, Roger, you're talking about Palm Beach as an example. There's other reasons why an application might be refused apart from its height, and one of those, but related to the height, is of course meeting certain preconditions. So if we determine that those preconditions aren't met, and that might have applied in version 8 or version 9, is the applicant still open to seek compensation? Because we're not just applying a height, which is the change, we're applying those other constraints or tests.
That's a good question, Councillor Young. There are some exemptions from an ability to apply for compensation, and one or two of them relate to whether there's loss of life or injury to property and that could be an example of, say, a change to the designated flood level. Council gets new information about a particular area, and that there needs to be a change to the designated flood level. So in a funny sort of way, a development loses some of its ability to get to that maximum height through a change to the designated flood level. That happened in version 6. So on that basis, council would have the comfort of knowing that if they applied version 9 to that application, there wouldn't be a risk of compensation. For the Palm Beach example, if it's just limited to height, I'm of the opinion that there is a real risk of a claim for compensation if it was just on taking away somebody's development rights and no other issues.
Councillor Ron Jones.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. So we're going to charge a higher fee for the applications to be received. So that was
2,755.
Yeah.
And at that point in time, do we determine whether or not it's a properly made or a well-made submission? Because I think you indicated that there were 3 that were maybe poorly made. Can we use that as part of the filter process to be a little bit more keen on whether or not they've been properly made at the start?
Through you, Mr. Chair, our criteria is all written information provided by a person to enable council to properly assess the request. That's a legislative requirement. It doesn't probably align exactly as what a development application is for a development permit, but it is in there, and it does give council officers enough scope to try to kick applications into touch that don't meet that particular criteria.
I just wonder whether or not if we get towards the end of that 12-month period and we suddenly get a whole rash of applications that are just being made so that they fit within that 12-month period but are actually poorly made or not complete, and the information request stage kind of flushes that out.
We have to be a little careful. Correct me if I'm wrong, Di, but we have 30 days to make a decision on a superseded planning scheme application, and if an applicant doesn't agree to extend that, I believe that if we tick over into the 31st day, it's taken that council has actually approved that request. So we've got to be a little careful there. We can't hold up applications. It's probably our approach that if it's a poorly crafted application, that we just simply refuse it.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just further to what Rog said, I don't believe there's actually any ability for us to ask for information, so we're probably just faced with, if we get a poorly made application, it will probably just be refused.
Thanks, Roger.
Any other questions?
Councillor Pettier.
Question about process, Chairman. Thanks, through you. I note the timeframes within which a decision need to be made, and the report suggests that the existing delegated authority regime will prevail, but matters will be forwarded to the councillor. There may be some really exceptional circumstances where a councillor seeks for the item to come to committee. As long as timeframes allow, that's not ruled out, is it, by adopting this
Through you, Mr Chair, it's high, if the applicant doesn't agree to provide extra time, it's a bit like deemed approvals.
Yes.
And we would be really reluctant to, I suppose, take a position of trying to get it to committee and council if we're going to be jeopardised by that 30 days. It's very, very difficult to get an item on the city planning agenda when we have such tight timeframes.
Yeah, understood. But I think there may be just the exception where it's the local council is really uncomfortable that a matter that was contentious in its first iteration, that it just comes through and unseen by the public, it's been granted a possible extension. So there may be an opportunity for the local councillor to approach you and have a matter brought forward as a late item. So it still meets the time frame. So I'm just trying to ascertain if that's ruled out completely or if there is that latitude.
Through you, Mr Chair, it's counselling. It's not ruled out by this resolution, but as Rog said, that's kind of the practice we would hope to be able to adopt.
Understand.
But there's always exceptions, and we'll do our best. But it's just something that we might not be able to do. And I guess we do have the special delegation ability as a backup if time doesn't permit it to get onto the agenda. So
Thanks, Chair.
I mean, by the time, if you've got 30-day window and you spent the first 3 weeks going, do we like this or not, and the officers start to arrive at a decision point, they've then got another week to try and get a decision made, of which there just might not be a meeting. So we're going to have to try and...
I appreciate that the constraints are very real.
So I'm fascinated by the previous, or the information provided that there was 400 applications lodged and 397 of those were ultimately approved. It seems like one of those things we have an administrative burden on ourselves that we're kind of trapped by the legislation to enable these. Could you just quickly comment on that?
It's quite, through you, Mr Chair, it's quite interesting that the IPA and the SPA...
So the IPA?
The Integrated Planning Act, that was 1997.
Just for those watching, I knew what I meant. There's a whole community of Gilston who are watching the Planning Committee today. So
the Integrated Planning Act and the Sustainable Planning Act...
Thank you.
They were 2 years, so superseded planning scheme requests were out there for 2 years. Under the Planning Act, they've cut it down to 1 year. But in my opinion, you make provision for an applicant to apply for a superseded planning scheme request, and the risk of compensation and the lack of case law in relation to compensation claims within Queensland, which is just about zero. It sort of implies that when we receive applications for a superseded planning scheme request, that we should be supporting them based on that it is only a year and threat of compensation.
And it seems like this new system effectively just streamlines that process. You lead us as divisional councillors know. Could I ask for, in no rush, but on notice, just the 400 previous applications? Could I get them separated by division just to take a look at them? I'd be interested to know where they were received from. It's not a rush. I don't mind when you do it.
Through you, Mr Chair, I thought you'd ask that. We can certainly get that data for you.
That'd be great. Thank you. And I think I would like that, but I think all the councillors might be interested.
Sure.
Just a reminder that all 400 came to me. Councillor Owen Jones.
So I was interested in moving the recommendation.
Could I just ask one more question?
One more question. Sorry, was there another third part to the presentation?
Yeah, and we do have Andrew and Michael here if there are any other questions that, maybe you...
You've done well, Rog.
Yeah. Okay,
and I've got to say, I think it's
Michael drove all the way down from Brisbane.
Whose fault was that?
It's all right. Okay,
So are you unhappy with how you've presented or with how Lara's presented?
Through you, Mr Chair, there's always room for improvement. So, hey,
I don't know how.
Okay, so
Let's roll up our sleeves and get onto it.
So question from... So who's the third person? Who's the third wheel? I thought there was 3. No, just 2.
I'm the spare.
Did you have something to add? Okay, that's fine. All right, question from Councillor Borster.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Through you to the Director, quite often we receive a report, I think might be quarterly, I suppose, that deals with items that have been dealt with under delegation. Just want to seek confirmation that delegated decisions to accept superseded applications will appear in that report in order to provide visibility to the whole council over and above the local councillor getting a heads up.
Through you, Mr Chair, Councillor Vorster, we're happy to do that.
So we don't actually report quarterly on every single delegated approval. It's only the ones that are done under a special delegation, the recess. So I wouldn't have ordinarily expected that this would have been in a quarterly report, so we might just want to think about that.
Sorry, and thank you. I suppose the reason why I think it's quarterly is because that kind of lines up with the community consultation period. So I'm not sure if it's needed, because I'm not sure if there is a public interest in it, a significant one, but it could be that every report that deals with superseded items might hoover up all of the preceding delegated decisions.
I think the critical thing which the officers have flagged is they're going to let the local councillor know. You know.
I don't really have to deal with them in my patch, but if that were a concern, and I guess I'm just responding to what Councillor Young's saying, that could have been an option, but I'm happy to leave
let's just have a think, because I think what we're trying to do here is actually reduce the administrative burden. Fair enough. So, you know, I think when the reports ultimately come to council, if I recall correctly, they are noted as being a superseded application in the content of the report. That's probably the best thing.
Yeah, Mr Chair, we can we issue that DA quarterly report, so we can just add that in as another statistic, which will be quite easy to do. And then every DA that follows a superseded scheme request, as Councillor Caldwell mentioned, is noted in the agenda reports. So.
Okay. Councillor Owen Jones, you happy to move the item?
I am happy to move it.
Moved by Councillor Owen Jones, seconded by Councillor Peter Young. Want to speak to it?
Yeah, just to say that I think it's actually important that the councillors continue to inform the community as to why the superseded applications are allowed to be received, and that is that threat of compensation. So there is no date where it's automatically the new scheme is turned up. There is 12 months for submissions to be made, and they'll be assessed appropriately. So, and I appreciate what Councillor Peter Young was saying in regards to the ability to potentially bring forward to committee the extraordinary, but I think we're far better off with a set of business rules that we follow consistently. And I think that the last, those numbers that were previously reported that showed that 397 of them went through, to me actually shows that that process is right. And I think it would be it'd actually be wrong to be able to single 1 or 20 superseded requests and push them through to committee just to do a little bit of, and I could imagine some grandstanding in that space because they have to be assessed.
All right, anyone else want to speak for or against? All right, councillors, we'll take the vote. All in favour? Against? Carried.
And we picked up Mudgeeraba while we were there.
Yeah. I think you'll be surprised how many still get travel.
Yeah, that's right. Andrew's a hard taskmaster.
You're really going surfing. You're going surfing now.
I wish. See you.
All right, 6.2. So we had unstarred this for Councillor Gates's declaration. Someone want to move this one? Moved by Councillor Vorster, seconded by Councillor
Yes.
Peter Young. All in favour? Against? Carried. And we welcome the ladies from the south. It's okay. I mean, the weather was so good down there. Why would anyone want to leave? Yes.
Oh, you're learning.
Well done. So we'll just note that Councillor O'Neill and Councillor Pauline Young joined us at 10:14 a.m. All right, we moved 6.3, we moved 6.4. Let's go to 6.5. Am I following that correctly? 6.5. And sorry, just for the sake of recording, Councillor Gates, in relation to 6.2 productive Gold Coast, did you vote in favour of that? Yeah, can we just note that on the... All right. Brief presentation in relation to this one. So essentially this presentation relates to items 6.5 to 6.9, and then we can probably deal with them as a starred bundle after that.
Excellent. Thank you. Good morning, committee and councillors. So as advised, next up we have 5 items combined under one presentation, being for 5 separate applications for a development permit for material change of use for a dual occupancy at 5 separate properties on Boydall Road in Ormeau. The applications are impact accessible and are recommended to be refused. The proposed developments all involve a change in use from an existing approved dwelling house and secondary dwelling by the building certifier to a dual occupancy. The proposals do not meet the location or density benchmarks of the city plan and have therefore all triggered impact assessment.
Councillors, just 1 second. So. Okay. So, councillors, I assume there are 49 people from Gilston who are wanting to view today's live stream, and the live streaming is currently not working. They're working to fix it now, but why don't we just take this opportunity to give the officers a 5-minute... Yeah. I mean, up to you. Well,
No one's contacted me, but I put on my Facebook page saying...
yeah, and sorry, I say that in jest. It's probably not just Gilston. It'll be other areas as well. But it's up to you. I'm just letting you know. So if we want to press on, we'll press on. Okay.
No worries. As advised, the subject sites are all located on Boydall Road within Ormeau, which is a recently created subdivision development surrounded by emerging community zones to the east and west. The subject street is located in the low-density residential zone, which generally envisions development density of 1 dwelling per 400 square metres. As noted in the report, the proposals are a density of approximately 1 dwelling per 260 square metres. This map shows the current applications on the street, being the 5 of them, and these applications were all lodged as a result of a development compliance investigation, and this investigation commenced in approximately September 2020. I've just got up on the screen the additional properties that are subject to that development compliance investigation and have received visits from that team and possible show cause notices. So only 5 of those have actually lodged applications, but as you can see on this, there's another 6 or 7 on the street that are also, I suppose, currently operating as a dual occupancy. This is the typical site plan and layout for the dwellings. As advised, these were originally approved as a dwelling house and secondary dwelling by the building certifier. And according to information obtained by council, the dwelling houses were then developed and converted to dual occupancy dwellings by way of separate power and telecom connections, separate letterboxes, additional bins, fences down the middle of the backyard, and separate households and leases over each unit.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, can I just ask a question on that?
Yeah.
How is it that they were able to get extra bins? I mean, as far as I know, if you have a look at, for example, the geocoded national address file, you would be dealing with a single street address, right? So if they've got a second letterbox, is someone arbitrarily tacked on an A and a B onto the second letterbox? And then how have they dealt with council and got that extra service attached to a rates bill? Because I'm quite surprised that it required a show cause notice, maybe on complaint, for us to arrive at this position.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm not sure how they obtained the extra bins. Something that we haven't looked into.
So
Let's just we'll watch the rest of the presentation.
Yeah,
because-
no, so I just want to flag that maybe we, from a development compliance point of view, just checking with our own internal waste management team might be a good way of identifying where this has been happening, kind of proactively. Anyway. Yeah, so how do you order like 6 bins for one property?
So one
Councillor
property
Jones.
can order they can order double bins that pay 2 charges for it. Yeah, so anybody can double their service, but they will be charged.
So 2 recycling, 2 waste, 2. Oh. I'll follow up separately, but I think that's fascinating. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
No problems. In regards to submissions, as the applications were impact accessible, 2 to 3 properly made submissions were received for each application. There was 1 main objection for each application lodged on behalf of 11 submitters by a planning consultant. This included an informal petition signed by 34 residents of the street. The objection included concerns relating to parking and traffic, visual amenity, building design, density, and so forth. Submissions in support of each application were also received. It's just noted these were received by other dual occupancy applicants on the street. Here's some various photos, images from the street, showing what I suppose the resulting visual amenity and parking outcome is, and probably where the concerns of the residents have stemmed from.
I mean, yes, there is, but there's a process that needs to be undertaken, so.
Yep, so that's some images from the street. Probably also of note is the fences down the middle of the backyards for the dwellings, and where there's a small 1-bedroom unit, they've kind of put a 3-metre wide backyard down the middle.
It's not even triangular.
No problems. Okay.
So the parent lot is how many square metres? 500 square metres.
About 520 to 530 for each lot. Yep. Yes. Yep. So summarising at the end, all 5 applications and subsequent 5 committee items are recommended for refusal, as detailed within the officer's recommendation and summarised on this slide. Any further questions?
Councillor Gates, just going back to your original question, obviously if these are approved, then there's nothing to be done further. So if in the event that they're refused by council and the omission of getting the approvals is cured, then nothing we can do. But if they don't get that, then obviously it starts a chain of events potentially. Councillor Hamill.
I think, Mr. Chair, there was this one bit of context that maybe was missed in the presentation, and that's all of these were built by the one provider. Yes, which is listed in the report as Gallery Homes. So they were all built by the one builder, all certified by the one certifier. These are all interstate investors who actually own the properties. So they were sold a package deal that would have included, some fairly good returns based on this model of having both sides rented out the way they are. Just that little bit of context, and then if there's any other questions, then I can wrap a couple up in it.
So it's interesting because on the back of a meeting that Councillor Aaron Jones and I had yesterday where we were being particularly cautious about dual occupancy lots and the sizes of those lots and the frontages of those lots, Here's a real life example of how it can go terribly wrong. Councillor Vorster.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor. Edgy. Don't live stream.
But when he turns up in 2 minutes' time,
we're missing the print deadline for Friday as well. He's listening though. Sorry, Mr. Chairman. I just want to flag, you might all recall that meeting I stormed out of when we were...
Which one?
Which one?
which one? Which one?
Yeah, and that all had to do with this dual occupancy, dual living thing. And I just think we need to be so careful in our approach to these things, because there can be all sorts of amenity issues created in the street, and these photos are shocking, and it shows what a bad outcome can be. Not to say that there can't be good outcomes, but this is a bad one.
It's one of the benefits of having a report to consider.
I wouldn't know, I walked out of the meeting. Though, my question, Mr. Chairman, through you to the Director or City officers, is just the role of the private certifier here. I'm just trying to wrap my head around this. So they issue some paperwork which essentially says that this building has been constructed in accordance with the prevailing planning instrument, correct? And we're not privy to that. That gets done at their end, and that paperwork's lodged with us, I'm assuming, to keep some corporate record. Is it the view of city officers that they have improperly certified these dwellings? And if so, what recourse is there to the investors or to the builders with the private certifier?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the private certifier, yes, that is correct. They issued a BA for the dwelling and the secondary dwelling. The private certifier was of the opinion that the development complied with the city plan. And in fact, when you have a secondary dwelling that's under 80 square metres and all the other required outcomes, a private certifier does have the prerogative to issue a BA. That is a accepted subject to requirements outcome, the old self-assessable outcome. So the private certifier, there's no reason for us to cast aspersions that he was acting inappropriately. He did have the legislative means to approve a BA without council approval.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, if you please put that in extremely layman's terms. Pretend I'm a councillor that's been elected a month ago. How is it that a building certifier can issue a BA for development that does not comply with the planning scheme?
Through you, Mr. Chair, this is where it gets a little bit complex, because there's a fine line between a secondary dwelling and a dual occupancy. These plans, if they had grandma next door,
yes,
you know, we have Jason from development compliance, but if it was used legitimately as a secondary dwelling where it was a member of the family or one household unit, that wouldn't be creating a development offence. The issue today is that there's two separate households living in each dwelling.
Right. So, sorry, thanks for clarifying it. So that does clarify it for me. Could I just ask whether, in these cases, the other tests that apply to a secondary dwelling have been satisfied, for example, with site cover?
And doesn't it have to be a smaller dwelling than the main dwelling?
Through you, Mr. Chair, all very good questions. The size of a secondary dwelling, for it to be the old self-assessable or now accepted subject to requirements, is 80 square metres. Yeah, so they meet the threshold. They probably meet site cover. They probably meet setbacks. They probably meet car parking. Probably Jason's the best person to clarify whether they meet every required outcome. But at the time of the BA, I going over the plans, considered the private certifier had the prerogative to issue a BA without council approval.
Right. So, sorry, Mr. Chairman, I just really want to tease this out. So, Roger, I mean, you've said probably, and I can only assume because you're saying probably because you were not party to the original development compliance investigation. But I'd like confirmation that in all other respects, this would be a compliant outcome for a secondary dwelling, because if not, I'll go back to my initial question. How is it that a private certifier can have a prerogative to ignore so many other tests that we would ordinarily apply when accepting a DA?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we have Jason here who's more than comfortable to have a chat on whether development compliance were of the opinion that all other required outcomes were met. Jason?
So isn't it mostly the case, though, Roger, that at the time that the certifier looked at these floor plans, it complied because it was vacant and there had been no offensive use taken up? If they were vacant and they'd just been constructed and you were going to put your elderly grandparents in the bit next door, we wouldn't be here today.
I totally get that, Mr. Chairman. I totally get that. I just want assurance that that is 100% the case, because those other tests with grandma moving in comply with respect to setbacks, site coverage and all the rest.
And also, can we just clarify, I get the 80 square metres, but wasn't it always that it had to be smaller than the primary dwelling? Like, there was, historically, I'm sure that the secondary dwelling had limitations.
Well, I mean, the thing is that in the end, it's all kind of academic, because we've got to the point where the officers have viewed that this isn't lawfully approved.
So, Mr. Chairman,
and so we get the decision to make today, and the recommendation is not to approve it.
Excellent. But I suppose from what I'm interested to know is whether council needs to be considering making some kind of referral, because if it is the case, and I haven't got that answer yet, that there's been a marked departure from the scheme and a private certifier has gone and issued these permits, then there's trouble in the market, the investors have been affected, the builders have been affected, the people living there have been affected, and it seems to be a systematic issue because we've ended up with 5 of them. So if those, sorry, how many? So far. So if these things do not comply as family accommodation, then I'd like to know, because then I think a referral is necessary. But if they do, I accept that we've arrived at the right place.
All right, Jason, do you want to?
Yeah, through the chair. Councillor, I think the non-compliance arises with the use. So it's the use that creates the non-compliance, the combined effect of how they're used, separate leases for each separate dwelling, separate water connections, separate power connections. There are other issues, but they all add up to lead us down the path that there's non-compliance with this.
So, I mean, people will read into this what they will, that it's the same builder and the same certifier, and one might reach a conclusion about how genuine they were about creating a family accommodation house. So, but that's probably a matter for others to worry.
So, Mr. Chairman, can I ask you, almost like with the rubbish bins, would it be unusual for a family accommodation, what we used to call family accommodation, to be sub-metered or have a separate water meter? Is that unusual?
Yes.
Through the chair, Councillor, it probably is unusual, although not, you would rarely come across it. It's really, regardless of the power, separate power meters, separate water meters, it's really about the use and the quite obvious and, the 2 separate leases. If you go to these properties, you talk to both households, they don't have any connection with each other. They're renting separately, they don't know each other.
But I mean, I think it's a valid point that there are obviously a series of steps that have occurred that have enabled this to get to the point of being...
Mr. Chair, can I? So I can't provide any context on the electricity connection, the sub-metering there, but it must have been one of the questions that officers looked into for me at one stage about the water connection. So when Gold Coast Water checks a water connection to a new dwelling, it's not at the house, it's from the main at the front to our water meter. So anything that happened after our water meter, we weren't aware of, because I thought, how did we not pick this up at that stage? But that's why, because we only check from meter back to the main line, not the connection to the house.
Sorry, Mr Chairman, through you to Councillor Hamill, but are there two water meters?
No, so there is one council water meter.
Yes.
And then after our infrastructure, it has been teed off to sub-meters.
Yeah, but we check the sub-meters.
No, we check the main meter.
So the property manager is splitting
Yeah.
the water charge on a private meter.
Right,
Yeah.
but under policy, we do sometimes have the ability to issue two separate water notes.
Yeah, but in this case, we haven't been. And it's one of the reasons for how it was originally picked up was a question coming through to the city about why does what I told the meter reading is not look like the meter at the front. They were checking their sub-meter when it was off the main meter. How the electricity one occurred, I'm not sure, because I thought their checks were a lot stronger than water's.
Yeah, so if I could just clarify there through the chair, councillor, so one owner, one water bill, presumably one power bill, I'm not quite sure on that one, and then split up by the property manager, which is usually, as has been stated, it's an interstate owner. They're relying on someone locally to look after it for them, and all those affairs are handled by that person, that property manager.
Mr Chairman, can I just ask a question about the interface between the two dwellings? Do we know under the building code, are there different requirements with respect to things like firewalls between a dual lock versus a secondary dwelling?
Through you, Mr Chair, that is a party wall. So in terms of, this is probably where the Building Act and the Planning Act don't sort of align. We've spoken to Darren Wright, who's our principal building surveyor. In his opinion, that there's no development offence through the Building Act side. Even though it's got a party wall, I suppose this scenario could be separated, which is just the same thing. They're attached. It has got a party wall, but in terms of planning, there is no development offence as a result of having a party wall, if it was used legitimately as a secondary dwelling.
Mr Chairman, through your question to, I guess, since Jason's up, but to Roger, to Mick as well, sorry. Apart from, I think, everything that's been teased out today, being one of the reasons why I was keen for this to come to committee, and I think officers were too, sorry. One of my concerns and reasons for bringing it to committee was that in the end we're dealing with people living here, so these tenants have entered into leases. They didn't know that they're entering into a lease somewhere they shouldn't have been legally. But there's a lot of people living in here, and in the current market, in the current situation, I'm very mindful of the fact that depending on the committee recommendation today, an adoption at full council, what happens with appeal process if they go into appeal, that sometime down the track there's a very real chance of compliance having to be taken on these properties to bring them back to what their use is intended to be, which probably means people losing their rentals possibly. So I was just wondering through you, Mr Chair, to Mick and Jason of how in the future we might deal with that as a city and making sure we take care of people as best we can.
Yeah, through you, Mr Chair. You're correct. I think the first step will be, if this is refused, the applicant will have an appeal period. There's not really much point taking enforcement action while there's an appeal afoot, because the courts will usually sort of stop that. Assuming we get through all that, we would act with discretion. I think we would work with each of the owners, and particularly the trying to understand what sort of arrangements with the tenants are in place, and we would take enforcement action, but the timing of how sort of strict we would act or how quickly we would act would sort of be a case-by-case basis depending on each house. But I think the last thing we would do is just force people to head into a tent or something like that tomorrow, sort of thing. So I won't be doing that.
Mr Chair, and that was exactly what I was looking to hear, and I already knew that, but I'm aware that a few of the applicants are watching this pretty closely, and some people and some of the tenants are that have now become aware that through public notification signage going up for a couple of the tenants, that was the first they knew about it. was a sign being put on the front lawn saying this is going through impact assessment. So I've had some interesting conversations with owners and some very distressing conversations with tenants who have been watching the media in the market of what's going on with rentals and worry they're going to be kicked out at some stage. I've given them assurance that won't be the case, that we'll work with them. I hope that Gallery Homes has what's coming to them, in all honesty. But just for an interesting little tidbit at the end before I close, Mr. Chair, not only is there 7 more in this street that have been identified as possible show cause notices to be coming, but I don't know if Jason's aware of this yet, but there's a CR coming through from my office where we believe 10 more have been identified in an estate just down the road from here. So there's a problem, yes, exactly the same as what's going on here. So there is a problem, and we're getting up towards a few hundred people being affected by it now, and a huge burden on council resources and officers' time dealing with something that appears to be because of flaws in processes.
Yeah, were there any other questions? Otherwise, all right, well, let's deal with items 6.5, 6.6, 6.7, 6.8 and 6.9 as a starred bundle. Moved by Councillor Hamill, seconded by Councillor Peter Young. Councillor Gates, question?
Is there any action that council can take now regarding the properties that Councillor Hamill has mentioned that he's aware of before they're leased to people who are going to be vulnerable? I mean, the 10.
They've all got people in them already.
Oh my goodness.
Yep.
It's wicked.
Yep.
All right, any other questions? Otherwise, Councillor Hamill, did you want to speak to it?
Mr. Chair, only to say a thank you to officers on this one. I think it'd be fair to say this has been a bit of a unique one for David and Adam and Roger and Mick to deal with, and they've been very mindful the whole way through of the fact that at some stage when this became public, and I'm expecting a bit of media on this one as well, that it was going to be put out there that way. So just a thank you to all of them. Their interactions with applicants and tenants and how they've gone about it has been first class. So thank you for the work they've put in. We won't bring all the future ones to committee, so we brought this lot through, but in future we'll do it through delegation. And just to say to any owners or tenants that are watching, or a few of them sent emails through to my office yesterday for wanting an update after committee, just to reiterate what Mick said, that if it comes to that in the future, where there's compliant action required, we will work with those people to make sure that we reduce the negative impacts as much as we can. And finally, Mr. Chair, to hope that to the owners from interstate who purchase these, if they have been misled or somehow had any kind of, if they have been misled and they are looking to take action, I wish them best of luck in that.
Thank you. Anyone else want to speak against? I'll just reiterate what I said earlier, and that is that we often spend time in this chamber trying to make sure we get approvals right, and we do that for a reason, that there are real and negative impacts of badly planned and constructed development, and this is one example where, without reference to council, these built forms have just popped up without all of the usual checks and balances that would have been undertaken, and we can see the real impacts of those on the ground, and it's extremely disappointing that someone has gone out of their way in a concerted effort to try and avoid the usual scrutiny that would be applied to construction of this type of product in our city, and I hope that that can be remedied into the future so that we don't see it continue to proliferate through those suburbs. Anyone else want to speak for or against? Right, we'll take the vote. All in favour? Against? It's carried. Councillor Gates.
I'm terribly sorry, but I've just noticed I've missed a declaration on the next item that we're going to do, 6.11.
We're up to 6.10 next, but that's all right.
Okay.
Do you want to...
Well, 6.11, if we could bring up the place design declaration that I made earlier on 6.2. They're over the page on 451, and I didn't realise the applicant's consultancy team. So I need to declare a receipt of donation, exactly the same as 6.2 for 6.11. If you just pull up 6.2, it will have all the information in it. I know that this is within the meeting, but, oh well, however you want to do it. Okay, that's it.
Right, happy with that one?
I can't see.
So if you can just copy all of that and then drop it.
Oh. Sorry, what was my reason? My reason is...
So you need to change the nature of the contract. Because it references
Council's project. The nature of the
Oh,
contract
sorry.
is different.
If we could go back up.
Scroll up.
above that, please.
Up.
They're the town planning consultant. No, but not by council. Sorry. And it's town planner and urban designer. Town planner and urban designer. Thank you. Sorry about that. You can leave the first paragraph there. No.
That you wanted to add to that, Councillor Gates?
No, it's fine. It's up to the council, whatever.
Right, so, Councillor Gates would like to remain in the room. Right, anyone like to move a procedural motion? Councillor Vorster.
Thank you very much, Mr Chairman. I'm happy to move that Councillor Gates may participate in the decision despite the Councillor's conflict of interest because the circumstance of a different scale here, but can we just scroll up a little bit to Councillor Gates' declaration? Because the Councillor Tozer might have some words.
That councillor, that the Because
So given the
public-
given the quantum of the donation and the passage of time, Councillor Gates's participation in the matter will not undermine public trust in the decision-making process. Yeah, thanks, mate.
Hey, Matt, how are we going with that live stream? Thumbs up or thumbs down?
Being recorded to be uploaded afterward.
Okay. Okay, moved by Councillor Vorster, seconded by Councillor Peter Young. Do you want to speak to it? Decision. All right, so moved by Councillor Vorster, seconded by Councillor Peter Young. Did anyone want to speak to that? Else we'll take the vote. All in favour. Division's called. Councillor Hamill, Owen Jones, Peter Young, Councillor Vorster, Councillor Pauline Young, Councillor Gail O'Neill, Councillor Caldwell. Against. And Councillor Gates did not vote. So that was for 6.11. So 6.10, I think we had unstarred for a declaration. Was there anything else in relation to that one that we wanted to talk about? Yep.
I'm not on the committee, so I can't move this
I
item.
want to move 6.10. I'm happy to move it. Second by Councillor Gates. Councillor Tozer.
This sort of reconfiguration of lots inside fairly steep slopes in and close to the Mudgebar precinct, I don't think is necessarily in line with the community's expectations of development, but particularly in light of the previous items that we've dealt with in Ormeau, I appreciate that it has been lodged in accordance with the city plan and is code-accessible. So I'm very appreciative that this applicant has actually done what they should do. And I'm talking to council town planning officers about changes to the city plan that can better reflect the community expectation in some of the older suburbs of Mudgebar and Division 9, whereby these sort of battle axe lots may not necessarily be able to be put at the back of old Mudgebar homes.
I'll just mention in passing, I did take note that the battle axe handle was not included in meeting the minimum lot size, which was a change that we'd made in 2016 as a result of effectively not really achieving the proper size of block. So at least we ended up here with a 400 and a 500 plus battle axe type outcome. So that's some improvement.
Mr. Chair, what appears to be happening is, old homes in Division 9 and particularly in Mudgebar that have sometimes got sheds at the back are being converted into dwellings, and those sheds are being demolished and buildings are being built and technology's changed such that we can deal with some of the unique challenges that Mudgebar has in relation to Albert Shire sewage and water. But yeah, I'm not sure the community expectations met despite the lot size provisions being changed. So.
And we'll note that Councillor Gates voted in favour. Item 6.11. Yeah, we'll get a presentation on this one. Councillor Tozer is interested in this one, so.
We'll let Crandon
where,
know.
Donna? Where? Should we throw a dart at the board and see which
Are we going to let Crandon know, or John Paul, or who are we letting know?
Oh.
A teal in Surface Paradise.
Hasn't been seen since Lex.
Do you know where else a teal would work really well? Out like mermaid on the way.
The Robocop is not for change.
I am just pleased that my choice of tie did actually raised some conversation today. I would have been disappointed if it hadn't. So, all right, fire away.
Excellent.
Thank you, Councillor Gates. All right, you can leave. Okay.
Through the chair, item 6.11 is a combined development application for reconfiguring a lot for 18 lots, open space, access easements, and for operational work for vegetation clearing at 473 to 477 Gilston Road and 22 Long Hill Road, Gilston. 22 Long Hill Road has been included within the application for stormwater infrastructure purposes. The application is recommended for approval. The site, let's go to the next one. The site is occupied by an existing dwelling located within the western portion of the site and a dwelling on 22 Long Hill Road. Generally slopes down from Gilston Road to the north and the east. That's the site generally. The site is located directly adjacent to the Gilston Hall. And this is the surrounding area, which incorporates the Narang River to the west of the site, Gilston State Primary School approximately 1.7 kilometres to the south of the site, and existing residential lots. The site is included within the emerging community zone, which allows for a density of 15 to 25 dwellings per hectare net and is guided by the Gilston conceptual land use map. The site is surrounded by a mix of zones, including rural residential, open space, conservation, and low-density residential. Site's located within the Gilston conceptual land use map, specifically with the suburban neighbourhood accommodating larger lots on sloping sites. The proposed ROL component of the application involves creating 18 lots, new road, open space for stormwater drainage and access easements. The lots range from 400 square metres in area and achieve a density of approximately 20 dwellings per hectare, consistent with the density identified within the city plan. 6 rear lots are proposed. These lots are accessed via shared access strips. Each rear lot incorporates a manoeuvring envelope to ensure sufficient space is provided for vehicles to turn and exit the site in forward gear. Proposed lot 900 is a drainage reserve with an area of 662 square metres, and this lot will incorporate a detention basin. A 4 metre wide combined sewer and stormwater easement is proposed along the southern boundary of 22 Long Hill Road. The recommended conditions of approval do require minor amendments to this plan, increasing the verge widths of the short access road and increasing the width of the entry to the rear lots to 4.5 rather than 3.6 at the very end. The operational works component relates to the removal of 22 trees from within the site to cater for the proposed development. A total of 95 submissions were received, consisting of 25 objections and 75 submissions in support of the development. This plan illustrates the general location of submitters in the immediate area, and that's just the general wider area. Any questions? Do you want to go?
Use blue and yellow, or stars and squares or something.
Oh, the green.
Apologies. Yes.
I have some questions.
Apologies on behalf of the entirety of the planning department for that. He's colourblind, so he can't see the difference.
I've asked him a few times not to use green and red,
so you might be able to see the black, Councillor Tozer, there's a black, it says subject site and there's a black line running to a black dot. Can you see that?
Yeah, it's a black, yeah.
So under the black dot, there is another clump of dots, and that's
they're all the red ones.
only red, and then every other dot, if you can make out the dots at all,
I can make the dots out. So, so is it saying that there's no red ones outside the area?
That's right.
But there's only, all the 4s are outside the...
Scattered.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Mount Tambourine and Bow Desert have come out strongly in favour of this.
And surprisingly, Palm Beach is strongly in favour of it.
Palm Beach?
Yes.
Not in my backyard, eh?
I have some questions.
If you're comfortable with me...
A question from Councillor Tozer first, and we'll head to the left.
So I've just got a series of questions, and part of that I appreciate. Firstly, I just acknowledge that the council officers have been really quite communicative. We've talked about this at length. They're very aware of some of the concerns that have been raised by the community about this development. but there are definitely members of the Gilston community who are particularly interested in how these questions get answered, because they've asked me questions and I've tried my best to answer those, and I think this is the right forum to do that. So the first thing I suppose I wanted to ask about is this thing called the clum. In the second slide, I think you talked about the Gilston clum, might have been the third slide, which is the conceptual land use map. And you use a description. What is a clum and what is its purpose? And yeah, help just express that for us.
Through the Chair, the conceptual land use map is conceptual by its name. It's intended to be a guide that says the specific areas for specific purposes. For example, in this one, it separates the green open space areas or more protected areas from the areas that are intended for residential development. In this case, it says suburban neighbourhoods accommodating larger lots on sloping sites. The Gilston area incorporates various degrees of sloping sites throughout it. In this particular instance, it was determined that the site incorporated reasonable slopes that could accommodate lots of the proposed size. There will be earthworks as a result of the development, but these earthworks were fairly minimal in terms of heights of retaining walls that will result from the development. The majority of them have a maximum height of 1 metre, all walls being less than the 1.5. So it was considered that the development did take into account those constraints and addressed the conceptual land use map.
Yeah, so some of the members of the community have talked a little bit about this phrase, larger lots on sloping sites, as part of their expectations and council's decision about what might happen in Gilston. And one of the defences that council officers put in the report was that the city plan doesn't define a large lot. There's no such definition as a large lot. Is there a definition for small lot?
Through the Chair, small lots are less than the 400, but this is larger lots. There is no specific defined what actually a large lot is.
Yeah, so just want to clarify, larger lots are not defined in the city plan, but smaller lots are, or a small lot is. And a small lot is defined as 400 square metres or less. Is that correct?
Through the Chair, yes.
And what's the average size of the lots in here?
Through the Chair, I'm sorry, I haven't got the actual average lot size.
Between 400 to 500?
It would be around the 500.
Yeah, so I'm trying to, as we've, lots of members of the community have read the report and they've fed back to me that the feedback to them was that that a larger lot isn't defined, but a small lot is defined, and it's 400 square metres. And I'm trying to work out how we, as assessing officers, determined that a larger lot was anything bigger than a small lot. Is that the conclusion we came to?
Yeah, through the Chair, a larger lot is, I suppose, it takes into account those constraints, though, of the site. So it's not specifically just anything greater than 400. If it can be accommodated on a larger site, on a more sloping site in other areas of Gilston, for example, other ones along Worley Drive at the moment that are being assessed, they may result in a larger lot than this particular development, but it really depends on the site-specific constraints and environmental constraints as well as topography.
In the city plan, is there any other type of lot size that's defined other than small lot, or is small lot the only defined size?
Through the Chair, it's just small lots that are defined. Other zones and things may have specific requirements for
I'm trying
lot
to get
sizes.
These are the questions that,
But large lots isn't a defined thing, and a medium or anything such as that. There's no definition for other lots in the city plan.
In the plan on page 526, which is kind of the subject site, and I think it was in one of the slides. I mean, you can see it on this slide actually. What is the size of the lots to the immediate south? Is there any?
Through the Chair, the rural residential lots, are you referring to? Yep. They would be standard 4,000 kind of size up lots.
Yeah. And to the north is the Peter Mills Park, which was previously council-owned land. And is it proposed that the drainage reserve connects effectively to that public land? Is that?
Through the Chair, the drainage reserve, I'll just go.
Oh, so it's lot 900, I think.
Yep.
It's proposed that will ultimately form part of the
Why won't this work?
Park area that Gilston Hall is located on.
Through the Chair, the drainage reserve is located backing onto those two smaller lots you can see just to the north of that pink subject site area. Here we go.
Yeah.
Yep. So lot 900, which is that.
Yeah, so it'll eventually form part of the park. It'll be a drainage reserve, but it'll border onto the park area.
It will back onto the lots to the north of it,
Yeah,
yes.
okay, cool. So on page 473, there is a comment that's made by officers that I didn't understand and I couldn't explain. So I hoped to ask you about that. It's an officer's comment, I think, in response to the performance outcome and acceptable outcome under the Emerging Community Zone Code. It says the proposed lots achieve lot sizes from 400, which I would state is a small lot, which are less than the minimum 4 hectare lot size, which is identified between the acceptable outcome number 5 of the Emerging Community Zone. And then there's a paragraph after there. Could you just take a quick look at that paragraph? Someone asked me about what that meant and I couldn't explain it to them.
Through the chair, the paragraph we're referring to, is that the one that starts off PO5?
Yeah, so PO5 is performance outcome number 5. And I think it says lots are of a size that do not compromise the development potential of land until such time as appropriate detailed planning has been complete.
Yep. Through the chair.
Can I just get some clarity before we keep going down the path of this small lot size? I thought that 400 square metres was the minimum lot size in the low density area. I didn't think it was defined as a small lot. So before we keep talking small lots, can we get some clarity around the facts, whether it is actually defined as a small lot at 400? Because I've had small lots in Northern Gold Coast put forward at 180. So I'd just like some clarity, please.
Through you, Mr Chair, we believe it's lots less than 400, and that actually aligns with the Queensland Development Code.
So I think Councillor Tozer has established these are not in the category of small lots.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Just wanted to be clear.
Thanks a lot.
It's the minimum we could do.
Yeah, so just to come back here, page 473 has an explanation. A member of the public has asked me how to explain that. Could you help me understand it?
Through the chair, the reference to PO5 and in relation to the lot size is not compromising the future development potential. That's, as the emerging community zone, it's like a holding kind of zone that keeps them as those larger lots until such time as they're ready to be developed, the infrastructure's available and so on, to keep them as the 4 hectare type minimum larger lots. Once the development comes in and they do then propose smaller lots able to connect to infrastructure, new roads and so on, that's when you can then do some smaller lots in accordance with the other requirements, including the density of the 15 to 25 dwellings per net hectare. But until that time that it is ready for development, it's intended to stay as larger 4 hectare plus lots.
Yeah, and so it's loosely suggesting that in places where we've designated emerging communities, that the lots are retained at a sufficient size to ultimately subdivide to a smaller size in accordance with the CLUM or in accordance with?
Yes, through the CLUM.
Right, okay.
Somewhere between 15 to 25 dwellings
per net hectare. Through yes, correct.
Right. So calculation in my head, 15 to 25 lots per net hectare. What is that in a average lot size? Like I'm assuming it's 10,000 square metres divided by 25. Am I doing that right?
Through you, Mr Chair, that's impossible to give you based on that because each site is different. Each site will have unique constraints. There may be more park or more roads, and that will ultimately affect the average lot size.
I can't remember where it is in the report, but it says that this one achieves 20.
Yeah, it's in between. And I'm just interested in the idea of net hectare. What does that exactly mean? Because I mean, this is a 1.9 hectare site. And there's 18 lots on it. You know.
Through you, Mr Chair, we calculate it via a gross and then net. So gross is the ultimate. Net is when you take it all your park and all your roads and what you're left with. That's your net area.
Yeah, okay. So there's 1 hectare of public space. That's cool. Excellent. So The next question I had actually relates to the road stuff. So on page, actually on the page we're on right now, on the slide, you'll see that it's proposed that there will be, loosely in the future, a road that goes down that, what looks like a battle axe handle to Long Hill Rise. Is that, that's not in the actual development application, but the development application makes provision for a future road to be connected. Is that?
Through the chair, this plan probably shows it clearer where you can see the grey area at the end of the proposed road that could go down to a future connection. That future connection could be through to Long Hill Road. It could be as an extension of that existing proposed cul-de-sac to service the lots that are within the emerging community zone along Long Hill Road. That future connection will be determined at some time in the future if an application were made over those lots.
And what's the planning legislation or mechanism or guideline that prompted council officers to tell the applicant that they needed to provide for that?
Through the chair, generally the planning scheme supports that, the ROL code, the emerging communities code, the new communities element in the strategic framework all aim to get road connectivity where possible. The Planning Amendment Regulation 2020, the Walkable Neighbourhoods, aims to have interconnected street networks. Where possible, the intent is always to try and get road connections.
Okay, and in thinking about that, if we can just scale back to the broader area, it occurs to me that because your report states that Gilston State School is 1.7 kilometres to the south, every resident in that broader catchment, and it'd be good to get the aerial shot that had a satellite image, that one there, every resident in that catchment would come down Peter Mills Drive and then effectively duck through that future road to move south to take their kids to school at 8 o'clock. There's different types of road standards for the volume of traffic that is in there. Have we configured this application based on just the 18 lots, or have we configured the expectation of this applicant based on that entire catchment all travelling south at 8 o'clock every morning?
Through the chair, the road catchment or the road was designed for a residential access street. I'm unsure in terms of catchment levels of the whole of that Peter Mills area going through there, but it is designed as a residential access street.
So just for the residences in the street, not for that?
Residential access street, I'm not sure of the exact numbers, but it does cater for.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, the actual road profile, not the carriageway, is 16.5 metres, so it would be a residential street capable of accommodating 750 vehicle trips a day, which I would have thought in terms of the Peter Mills catchment, it would be well under that 750.
So 750 trips per day?
Yeah.
Did you want to ask a question about that? Yep, so I was on the road, so... I'd love to come back after the road questions are asked, if that's okay. I've got some other ones here.
Can you just explain to me what that movement was that you're talking about? Because
so the area, funnily enough, in the newspaper today, it talks about Gilston being the most family-friendly suburb on the Gold Coast, and we have lots and lots of young families, many of whom drive their children to Gilston State School, 1.7 kilometres south of this location. There is no pathway, there is no active travel because it's a state road and they've never determined to be able to do that.
just explain the driving manoeuvre that you're talking about.
Oh, the explanation.
So the pictured catchment to the bottom 50% of that picture on the left will travel through any of the roads, and then my hypothetical is that they're not going to travel up to the Long Hill Rise roundabout if there is ultimately a through road, and I wanted to make sure that the applicant had built, I don't want to burden the future ratepayer for an upgraded standard of road because it ends up being used by more than the 18 people who live in the street. So it's not a cul-de-sac. The way they've designed the road, it's...
Permission granted. Driving up here,
No.
cutting through there?
No, the opposite direction. So what I'm saying is... all of these... May I approach? Sorry.
Yes.
Order in the court. My proposition is that all of these residents, of which a high percentage of families,
will ultimately, instead of what they're currently doing, is they're driving down these roads and going to that roundabout, which we've considered all the traffic implications of that. But this applicant is building what is effectively a small road here with future provision. My view is that all of these, if there's a road available, they will duck through that. And I want the standard of that road, if it is to be delivered, to be sufficient to deal with this entire catchment and not just those 18 homes. Because the ratepayer will have to pay for a road upgrade because no one's going to bother going to the roundabout here if they can just duck through the back way here.
All roads lead to Gilston.
Okay, sorry. Thank you for clarifying that. Councillor Vorster, then... Oh, sorry, Councillor Hamlet, you were next.
Mr Chair, a few scattered questions. Can I get confirmation that what size truck the swept path for the waste vehicle is for? Obviously, there's a half hammerhead in the design, but just clarification, what size truck the sweep path was assessed against?
Through the Chair, Water and Waste looked at swept paths for a standard garbage refuse type vehicle for turning within that area, and the swept paths were provided for that, and it complied with those.
All right. And is it the intent, so obviously the bin placement for lot 6 is proposed to be on the other side of the road. Is that going to include like a concrete pad with that defined, so that's where they put their bins?
Through the Chair, there's no requirement for concrete pads at all in terms of bin placement.
And is there any requirement on or notification to the future owner of lot 6, if this all gets approved, that they have to put their bins on the other side of the road?
Through the Chair, there is no notification or any identification of that.
Yeah. I'm interested too, so that's a fairly tight swept path. I'm sure it shows swept path, but what doesn't come up is when you actually take a truck out there and people have got bins and cars parked in the wrong spot. So is it proposed to yellow line that half hammerhead so that the truck can get in and out without obstruction?
Through the Chair, there is no current requirement for yellow lines in that location.
Cool. While we're on that half hammerhead, so because of that design, it removes a spot in front of lot 9 and lot 6 for an on-street car park. So I'm just wondering if you could obviously give a comment that that would be a requirement of this, that would be, a garage and then on-street one car park. So these two lots can't fit that.
Through the Chair, there's no specific requirement that talks about on-street car parking.
Yeah, so we're making the rear lots, I'm just interested because the rear lots have a requirement to have to provide a car parking space on their lot because they can't have an on-street one, yet 2 of the blocks that are on street don't have to provide an on-street car park. And they'll end up using that half hammerhead, which will end up being a turnaround not just for waste trucks but for other vehicles and whatnot as well.
So are you talking about the half hammerhead between lot 9 and lot 6?
Yeah.
But that's actually a driveway?
Yes.
So, I mean, no one's going to be able to park there or they'll be blocking the easement. So, I mean, like, the people in 7 and 8 are going to be like, sorry, but you're going to move your car, I can't get into my house. Aren't they?
Through the Chair, that section is actually, will technically be road.
Yeah, I get it's going to be road, but like...
Just...
Yeah, you can't.
So it will be.
It's...
Anyway, yeah, like I said, it was a bit scattered. Anyway, I'm interested, so for the rear lots, so lot 15, lot 11 and lot 7, I'm guessing what is the total of the easement for the driveway has been reduced from the lot size. So, for example, lot 15 is 582, but in purple 436 excluding easement to meet the minimum lot size stuff, the block size.
Ryan.
How come for lot 2, 3, 4 and 5 the easement up the back or proposed easement isn't a reduction on those blocks?
Through the Chair, the easement at the rear of the lots on the northern side of the road is not for access.
Okay.
It's only for stormwater and
so that's only to do with access on those other ones? Yeah.
That relates to my comment earlier that in the old days we used to count the battle axe driveway handle as part of the notional lot size, which we've moved away from doing.
Yeah, and just to clarify, so we're going to make lot 8 and lot 7 wheel their bins all the way down a 40-metre long driveway across the road, and we expect that not to cause problems. Just that there, like.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's an expectation in rural
I just
residential
think
that'll happen.
through lived experience, Mr. Chairman, those bins will end up on the edges of the hammerhead, and then they won't end up on the other side of the road, and then trucks end up hitting them and everything else. I think it would be good if that's a design that's going to continue to come out, have concrete bin bays with identifiers on the other side of the road and make it a notification on the property, which is what I know Redlands Council do, for example, just to hoover up that issue.
Mr. Chairman.
So I can assume on the left-hand side of that plan where the proposed entry is from Gilston Road is the only place that that entry could go, and then the extrusion of the new road to the right-hand side of the map is by the applicant in order to get that minimum lot size of 400 square metres. Did we ever give any consideration to asking to drop the road size to eliminate the battle axes and increase the lots slightly?
Through the chair, there was lots of discussion throughout this process in terms of the rear lots, the size of lots, frontages of lots, and so on. And ultimately, this design was one that complied with the requirements of the city plan.
And where the proposed new road extrudes out the other side, ultimately, if that was formed by a future application, it could either continue to have access from Gilston Road or notionally, what's the adjacent road?
Through Long Hill Road.
Long Hill Road. But then there would be, if it was to continue through to Long Hill Road, you would end up having an offset from the Peter Mills Drive, which I wouldn't have thought would be a good outcome for any future application on that side of the clump. So where the highlighted single lot is, which is for stormwater, that's not actually where the road, a future road would be below that, and you'd have an offset, which I wouldn't have thought that we would ideally like to encourage.
Through the chair, the final location of that road, whether it be a through road, whether it be a cul-de-sac, whether it continues straight or have a cul-de-sac head, which is at a different angle, it is unknown at this stage. So the actual ultimate where that road was to come out onto Long Hill Road hasn't been assessed in terms of its specific location.
But we're kind of steering it closer to Peter Mills at the moment by accepting this proposed new road within this application. So if, for example, we wanted it to be further, I'm going to say south, that would get it naturally further away from Peter Mills and further away from that conflict that would happen.
You'd have to take out 6 and 7.
That's maybe what I'm thinking.
I mean, the road might head down the page or something like that and then spit out closer down near that green space, for example. That might be the configuration.
Which I would have thought...
You're thinking we need some flexibility on? Yeah.
Which I would have thought would be a better long-term outcome for the city rather than that conflict of a road spitting out 40 metres from Peter Mills. And I know that it's very difficult because we don't have an application on that side, but I think that we should be giving some consideration today in regards to what this application does in regards to setting up an application for those future lots in due course.
Okay. Councillor Vorster.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Can I just ask a couple of questions? One, that lot 900, which is like balance lot, drainage reserve to be dedicated to council. Could you just talk through what the final form of that drainage reserve would be like? Are we talking about something that is passable as a park during a dry spell but a boggy mess otherwise?
Through the chair, the drainage reserve will be occupied by a basin, stormwater detention basin,
Right.
and batters to that basin. There will be no use as such for any recreational opportunities.
Right, so it's to be dedicated to council, so we will then have a burden, an ongoing burden, in order to, keep reprofiling that and revegetating that over time as the basin fails?
Through the chair, that will be a council asset, yes.
And the only reason why we would have this is in order to support the development of these 15 lots?
That is correct. It is for these 15 lots, 18 lots.
So, Mr Chairman, I mean, if this sort of development came through, I suppose, my patch, the first conversation I'd be having with city officers, noting the parking issues that will certainly be created, noting the bin issues that will certainly be created, and the driveway issues, and I suppose the burden of this detention basin. The first thing I'd be saying to city officers is, why can't we support a development outcome with a responsible body corporate to manage all of these issues? Because I feel as though if this development were to be supported, it's going to be a rat's nest of development compliance issues and neighbourhood disputes, and there's going to be an ongoing burden on the ratepayer in terms of this basin. Yeah, so I suppose I'd be saying a body corporate should exist to take financial responsibility for that drainage reserve and to manage internally disputes pertaining to bins and parking. Can I just ask whether that was countenanced during the development assessment process?
Through the chair, community title development wasn't tabled during the assessment of this application.
Would it be a reasonable approach to have a condition that supported a community title scheme outcome here? And I suppose I'm flagging that because I actually don't believe there's much merit in a future road connection.
Through you, Mr Chair, we can't force the applicant to have a community title scheme. They've lodged standard format fee simple lots. That would be a significant change that they haven't applied for. So my advice is that you couldn't condition that.
So I just want to pick up on one thing. Do we actually envisage, though, that this detention basin has a future, what I'd describe as regional potential to service the lots to the right-hand side when in the ultimate development form?
Through you, Mr Chair, no, it wouldn't, because the lots to the east are lower, so you can't sort of drain up the hill back into this.
Very gently put me. It's like pushing someone else. So, Councillor Peter Young, Councillor Hamill, then Councillor Tozer.
Thanks, Chairman. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions about the proposed treatment of the boundaries and the landscaping and so forth. So I'll draw your attention to page 483 and 4, which indicate on the right-hand side, page 484, this is a setback of the fencing from property boundary. So what I'm seeing, bless you, what I'm seeing here is a fence constructed at the top of a retaining wall, but that's, and landscaping which is within the new property, and so the plants will actually sit within an existing property.
Through the chair, on page 484, that's the cross-section of the proposed dwelling at the frontage of Gilston Road, so that would be lot 18. The vegetation itself is within the property boundary. There's the 600 mil and then the retaining wall and fence.
Okay, so that's similar to what's on page 456, which is described as the setback of the fencing along Gilston Road, whereas the diagram I was talking about says it's setback of fencing from property boundary, probably the same. So in my experience, Mr Chairman, I almost said Mayor, like property just directly opposite my driveway, they've removed the fence so they can get in the back with a machine and put in a pool and just leave the fence undone. And so then it's a development compliance issue. Then people don't maintain the plants because it's outside their boundary, seemingly, it's beyond a fence, and it becomes a public problem. We have development, it becomes a development compliance issue. It's crazy. So I'm just wondering what provisions there are for that anticipated in the proposal. Whose responsibility is it, and how do you expect that to be achieved, please?
Through the chair, it would be expected that would be the property owner's responsibility in terms of maintaining that vegetation within the boundary itself.
Mm-hmm. No.
The fence is on the inside of the boundary, so.
Yeah.
How will the owner of the property know that their boundary is past the fence?
Through the chair, they should know in terms of where their boundary is, where their fence is, and on a plan they would be able to see. In terms of practically, they would know that it is the 600 mils within the boundary. Any vegetation outside of that would be able to be accessed from the frontage of the site. These are the properties, lot 18 and 1, the cross section is actually 18. So they are visible. It's not vegetation that's tucked away behind where it's screened, you can't really see it. It is something that the property owner would be able to see and would be able to access from the front of their property and then along Gilston Road.
Do you mind if I follow up a question for that? No. So,
yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, we decided to take this approach 4 or 5 years ago as a result of the impacts of fencing along streets. So that was our concerted effort to try to get some vegetation in the front to screen the monotony of that long fence. So it is a deliberate approach that we've taken for the last 5 years in relation to trying to reduce the dominance and the austere appearance of fences. Yep, there are some issues, but most of the time it actually works.
I mean, particularly in Coomera, we had huge stretches of fencing facing main arterial roads where there was backyards and no road access or front yard type features. So it became particularly ugly. In this instance, we've got 2 stretches of fencing. One's 14 metres and one's 16 metres. So I don't think we're probably going to create a huge problem whichever way we went about it. It was more the hundreds of metres of lengths, particularly that were needing some sort of softening treatment. So, I mean, we could, for the sake of 14 metres, move the fence to the boundary line and request that the vegetation be on the inside on this occasion, but that's kind of where it all came from. So, Councillor Tozer.
I mean, my comment in relation to Councillor Young's question is just I actually have no problem principally with the idea that there be a fence and there be a tree, but it needs to be very clear for the new property owner that is either their tree or not. And I think it is reasonable, a reasonable person will see the fence and think, well, that's the boundary. They're not going to check the survey. No new property owner is going to check the survey. Is there anything lawfully constraining us from moving the fence to the property boundary and having the tree on the council land and then it being effectively a dedicated road reserve with a tree on it? I don't know, is there anything wrong with that?
Well, only that shifts the burden to us, I suppose, is the immediate answer, but it achieves the same thing, but takes the responsibility away from the landowner to being in council road reserve.
Yeah, okay. All right, I mean, that's the only question I had from Councillor Young's stuff. It was unrelated to my other questions, so.
Councillor Young.
Thanks, Chairman. So I accept that the reasons these are done, and in most cases I accept that the outcome is reasonable, but I know from personal experience that in some cases it's definitely not. Then it becomes a compliance issue, and I think maybe by annotating the rates notice for those particular properties, it's clear to them that they have that responsibility, and then we achieve that maintained edge, which is ideal. And I have another question then. What?
The main arterials. Yeah. Once the vegetation grew up around it, it starts to look a lot better than what it did when it was first done, you know.
We have a problem with Cops Road where that happens you know, where the fence garden on the roadside, and we have residents forever asking us to see that they're maintained. Forever. Karen's usually straight onto it.
Thanks, Chairman. Is there any indication of what the boundary treatment will be along with the existing properties to the east, please? I might have missed it.
Be cut to some degree in that location. There will be retaining walls along the boundary on the east. Lot 900 is the drainage reserve, and that will have the batters, which then merge into the adjoining property.
So we don't have a diagram of that?
I'll see, I may have got that on here. This plan shows retaining walls within lots. You can see the one along that eastern boundary shows that retaining wall I was referring to in lots 6 and 7.
Up to 1.25
Up to 1.25, and it does get steeper down towards the frontage of that lot nearer the road. These are the retaining walls within the lots themselves. There is a small one within the end of the road, which, if it was to be connected in the future, would just be merged into the road.
I found that diagram in the report. Thank you. So is there a diagram about the treatment of or what the cross-section of that might be, or is that it?
That shows the cross-section. The furthest one shows the cross-section just within the property, it down to the drainage reserve, but not the other side. And that's the cross-section at the front of the site. There we go. That's a cross-section basically through the road, through the middle of the site, looking towards, the top one, towards the drainage reserve, towards the north.
Thank you.
And the other one to the south, where the rear lots are.
So it's actually, lot 6 is actually cut down into the block, the retaining. So, Councillor Young, it's not 1.5 plus or 1.25 plus the fence. It's actually cut down 1.5.
Yes.
1.25.
So the wall.
So the adjacent neighbour will only see a normal fence height.
Correct. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
So this slide looks like the cross-section for the driveways, which is another series of my questions here. I just wanted to get some picture from the street. So the lower section of this is the cross-section from Gilston Road on the left-hand side to the private property on the right-hand side. And there's a depicted where it says, is it RDC or ROC, next to lot 13 and not lot 10?
Through the that's the rear access street.
Yeah, so I'm right in saying there's a retaining wall of up to 1 metre on the left hand, on the lot 13 side of that little gap where the man or the woman and his little person are there.
That is shown, if I just can flick back to that retaining wall plan, that shows the exact heights of those walls. So in lot that you're referring to would be the one up to 1
a metre.
And then on the other side of that, the western side is up to the 600 max.
Yeah, so just duck back to the other one. So just trying to get my head around this picture, back one. So there's going to be a retaining wall of 1 metre plus then a 1.8 metre Colorbond fence, is that right? So it's effectively potentially a 2.8 metre tall, I mean, it doesn't look, I'm assuming that man isn't 2.8 metres.
I think this cross-section also shows, this is a more detailed specific cross-section for that rear access area, which shows that there will be some vegetation along either side of that. And the fencing plan, which I think is here as well, shows the heights of the fencing in that location. So yes, it is the 1.8 timber paling fence through that main component of the rear access strip.
Yeah, so it's a 1 metre tall retaining wall plus a 1.8 metre timber paling fence on top of it. So it's 2.8 metre alleyway.
Through Chair, that is correct. It does have the retaining wall and then the fence height above it and the vegetation.
3 metres tall, wow,
screening on
or
that.
2.8 metres tall. Okay, that clears that up for me. Are you comfortable with me following on with some of the other questions I have here? No, just trying to get it. So in performance outcome number 2, it talks about a rear lot that does not result in unreasonable amenity impacts for adjoining lots by limiting the rear lots to 1. That's a performance outcome in the city plan. When we thought about the unreasonable amenity for adjoining lots, did we only consider this development's 18 lots, or do we think about the adjoining lots to the south?
Through the Chair, the adjoining lots to the south are considered, any adjoining lot, south or east. In this case, it was considered that the existing dwellings on those lots were sufficiently set back. The dwellings to the south are the ones that are within the rural residential zone. There's 2 houses, a large house, which you can actually just kind of faintly see there, a large shed, and there is another one about where the legend is written on there, which are both set back a reasonable distance from what will be future houses. Taking into account as well the earthworks on the site where some of those retaining walls drop the proposed lots down will assist in that visual separation between the existing and the proposed lots.
Yeah, and so across the southern boundary of the development site, there's the properties that the existing properties are lower than the new properties. So they will be responsible for a retaining wall at the back there, and then again a 1.8 metre high fence across that back. Is that correct?
Through the Chair, there will be 1.8 metre high fencing at the back. Sorry, I just flick back through to that fencing plan.
It seems like the entire perimeter is the existing timber fence.
Nothing's changing.
I think there's a retaining wall. I think what I'm trying to say is that the actual amenity is not just a 1.8 metre high fence, but it's actually a 1.8 metre high fence on top of a 1 metre retaining wall, which will be viewed by the adjoining lots.
No, through the Chair, the retaining wall plan doesn't have a section through that location, but it does drop down. So if you were in this house on the corner in that kind of rectangular shaped lot, that will be looking down over. The house will stay obviously at its existing location. The lots where the purple retaining wall is of the 1.5 max then will be seen by the future residents looking at that rather than the existing house will look over the top of that.
Can I ask a question by looking at the map? Is that right? So I'm trying to use again, colour's a bit of an issue for me, but this is a retaining wall that is between 0.6 of a metre and 1.5. That's a retaining wall of that. And then there's a fence of 1.8 metres. So this is that one?
Yes.
So this is this resident right here is going to be looking at a 1.5 up to 1.5 metre.
It's a cut. That's a cut.
So the existing timber fence.
So this is the
nothing
low one.
changes about what
They see from a fencing perspective.
But these guys look at a 1.5
That's right,
retaining wall.
yes.
So these guys here, the new resident looks at a 1.5 metre retaining wall. But down here, isn't this lower? These properties are lower than this property. This is the high point.
There will be earthworks that do change that. They're kind of similar-ish height around where the existing shed is to where that lot 18, 16 are on the existing property. But then there will be earthworks that will cut this property down.
My point is to the south, it's reversed. So the adjoining lots to the south and the adjoining lots to the east will.
Can we merge the retention basin with one of the lots, make that owner responsible for its maintenance?
My understanding is these lots are lower and these lots are lower, that lot is higher. So there's obviously a gradient that goes from the high point to the low point, but once you come down here where this house is, these guys are going to be rural.
It's all been cut.
These ones?
Yep.
So through you, Mr Chair, Councillor Tozer, what the position we were just talking about, if you're in a house to the south and you're looking out, you look just at a fence. But if you're down...
Go to the fencing plan. Okay, just let's talk to that.
Oh, sorry, the other way.
Okay, so stop there. So all of that, it's very hard for you probably, Councillor Tozer, but the entire boundary fence is described as existing 1.8 metre timber paling. So anyone looking towards the development will not see anything different in the geography to what is exactly existing now. They will then cut to varying levels on the other side, so on the development side, and its most severe cut is on that western side, and then it seems to get a little bit less as it works around to the east. So,
so my case is that knowing the topography of the area, looking west, the new residents
will see a retaining wall and a fence.
Yes.
But on the eastern side,
yes,
there will be a retaining wall in order to retain lots 6 and 7. That the eastern, the eastern existing residents will, they will look at a retaining wall and they're effectively
they're going to look at a existing timber fence
plus a new retaining wall in order to retain lot 6 and 7.
No, it cuts down.
Through the chair, this diagram shows it, that cross section that we're probably talking about.
You're cutting that lot down.
That's right.
So even on the eastern end, there's a cut.
No, it is lower, but you're cutting it down lower than the lower.
So it's being cut everywhere. So at the eastern end, as we can see through section H, the bottom section on that little section diagram shows that the cross sections through that, and even at the western boundary, it shows that lot 18 will also sit lower than the neighbouring property.
Yeah, I get it. And so when stormwater falls on lot 6 and 7, it's going to effectively flow to the south.
Through the chair, the stormwater from those lots will be directed to stormwater infrastructure within the rear access lane, which will then be piped to the detention basin within the drainage reserve. There will also be pits within the road that lead to pipes that go towards the detention basin as well.
So we'll be pumping the water that falls on lot 6 and 7, we'll be pumping it back up the hill to lot 900.
Sorry, I missed that.
No.
So water that comes out of the sky and falls on lot 6 and 7 will be pumped back up to lot 900.
Sorry, I can probably help out here a little.
Through the chair, we've got a hydraulic engineer who will probably explain this.
Let's hear from the engineer.
Apologies. So through the chair.
Yeah, apologies. So just to clarify the fall of the site, everything falls towards lot 900. So the entire drainage system with the pit and pipe connections will all flow via gravity over to the combined bioretention and detention system on lot 900.
Oh, that's good. It must be an optical illusion when I'm on site. I thought lot 7 was lower than the road.
They're cutting, so I think it's probably...
It might be now, but...
Yeah.
So again, just clarifying, we're not picking up any stormwater off Gilston Road that's going into that lot 900?
Yeah, of course we would.
Yes, I believe there is a small external catchment there, but the sizing of the internal drainage has been set up to account for that.
Right. So we're actually dealing with stormwater that's also coming in off the site.
Yeah.
Yeah, but where's it
That's okay.
flowing back?
Hey?
Fair enough, but only because we're now diverting it into the site. But
it would have flowed to the north.
Yeah, we've been previously dealing with that problem anyway.
It's been the stormwater's been flowing to the north before this site was developed because that's the natural.
I'm just
flow.
trying to make sure we iron that out because it has trunk implications for what they could claim off us, for example.
Yeah.
Sorry, just to clarify again, lot 900 won't serve any catchment purposes for anything that's developed to the east.
Through the chair, and that's correct.
Okay.
Just for only
That's
for the
fine.
site.
That's all right. Okay, we'll go to Councillor Hamill, then Councillor Peter Young.
Mr. Chair, this slide helps with one of the questions, and then we might have to go to one of the other ones. But can I get clarification that the access and service easement, does that end in line with the boundaries of the front lots, or does that easement continue into, say, for example, 16 and 15 for a section?
Through the chair, the access and service easements is within the handle, the access handle itself. It doesn't continue. The green manoeuvring envelope is a separate thing. It's not anything to do with the access easement or the services easement. It just extends through to allow for, because the access handle itself, with the example of lots 15 and 16, the access handle itself is within lot 15, so it has direct road access, whereas lot 16 doesn't. Its boundary finishes at the 3.6 metre frontage there, so it then needs the access easement to get out to the road and the services easement covers that as well.
Lost me, but we'll charge on. The manoeuvring envelope, that's not part of the easement. Is that an easier question?
The manoeuvring envelope is a separate thing altogether.
Yep. Okay, so is that meant to be demonstrating a sweep path of a vehicle in there?
Through the G, that is correct, yes.
And a car or a truck?
Through the chair, a car. So I think I understand it's the largest design vehicle. So I think it's, what is it, the B99 or 95 they call them. So it's certainly not a garbage truck, or it's a standard vehicle.
So a garbage truck can't turn around?
Not in the envelope, yeah. Yeah.
Through the chair, Councillor Hammond.
Yeah, I'm interested in that. So what size truck can get down there on that sweep path? I know a garbage truck doesn't have to, but you want to get a removalist truck down there, a delivery truck down there, what size can fit?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't think we've actually done that assessment about what trucks would fit. We've just looked at what vehicles would use a dwelling, so they're just standard vehicles or vans.
So what, a removalist truck's meant to park out in the road and haul stuff down a 30-metre driveway?
I'm not entirely sure, through the chair, how they do it. If it were me, I'd probably back the removalist truck down the easement and then they'd be there for
But you're sitting on your neighbour's property?
For a period of time, I think that'd be reasonable. A short period of time when they move house once every few years.
I got a couple others. Go through that. There is, with the access easements, who owns the VXO? So the easement on these would be registered to 15, 11 and 7. The actual VXO to the road, who has a requirement over that? So from where the easement ends, which is in line with the front boundaries, who owns the rest of the driveway then to where our VXO would start?
Through the chair, the driveways or the VXO part would be associated just with the lot that it is a part or it's associated with. So as with a normal lot 17, for example, it would be lot 17. So with 15 is the lot that extends out to the road or to the boundary.
Yep.
So 16 through the same lot.
And then...
Yep, but 16 would have no legal encumbrance over repair and maintenance or stuff like that because the easement is registered to lot 15.
Through the chair, the easement is over lot 15 in favour of lot 16. So the easement document would have details in terms of the maintenance requirements and so on for that driveway area.
Cool. Mr. In the report, it talks to an MCU that was dropped partway through the process. I'm wondering if officers could provide some information of why that MCU was dropped.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair.
Or you can leave it at
through you, Mr. Chair, it is a very technical point, but the original MCU application was only a development permit. It wasn't a variation request. And as the request for the plan of development associated with that related to accepted development, there was actually no need for an MCU because it's accepted development. So you're only applying for an MCU if you're accessible development. So there actually wasn't any need for it. There was actually no ability for council officers to actually approve the MCU because what they're after was accepted development. What they're actually after is a deviation from the acceptable outcome for site cover. That can be dealt with through the referral agency advice application process.
And final one, Mr. Chair, there's some information in the report that talks to historical developments with rear lots like this, but I noticed that most of the examples don't have this one common driveway servicing 2 lots. It tended to be one driveway to one rear lot. Has that been a change because since city plan, or is that just because the examples just happen to be those ones? Like, was there a change at some stage that we said, okay, we're happy to have common driveway service 2 rear lots now versus in the past, was it different? Albert Shire.
That does have a combined access,
I know
but other than that, they're all older examples, I suppose. It is something that is not uncommon to have a shared access similar to this, where 2 rear lots access via one access handle.
All right, cool.
That they don't live in anymore was configured exactly that way in a 6-lot subdivision where, not on their block, but on the other 4, there was one that serviced both of the back
It was
blocks.
more of an interest, Chair, if there had been a change at any time. Like, I know it happens everywhere, and it's no.
I'm going to give Councillor Young a go, and then I'll come back to you.
I'll be brief. I think I'm just trying to correlate the locality plan, which shows the 4 lots, with the actual site development plan, which seems to just be the square bit and not the finger out to Long Hill. This might have been covered by previous questions, but that doesn't seem to correlate with the development plan, which just seems to be the square bit. Can you explain, please?
Through the Chair, the finger component, lot 22 or number 22 Long Hill Road, that's been included in the application for the purposes of services and infrastructure. It's not being developed as such. No lots are going there. It incorporates a 4 metre wide combined stormwater and sewer easement that runs along the southern boundary of that lot, and that is the only thing that relates to that lot.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
So just back to that last slide where we saw the examples of other rear lots, when I saw the word historical subdivision, when we use that phrase in a report, what does that mean? How do we define that? Historical subdivision. It just means it's before our current planning scheme, or does that mean just in...
Through the Chair, it was just probably a reference to an older subdivision, no particular technical reference at all.
Okay. And what's the lot sizes of those ones? I mean, they seem to all have swimming pools and they're quite large, and they've got, as Councillor Hamill said, their own driveways. Do we have an analysis of those? I mean, they've obviously used some examples as lawful rear lots, but what are their sizes?
Through the Chair, they vary in lot size. The ones, the old ones in Mudgeeraba, I haven't got the exact sizes to hand, but they're probably the 600 kind of area, excluding the access easement. The one at Hinterland Drive, obviously that's got the lot size on it, that was in the 400s. And the Coby Drive one, being Coby Drive, it's probably going to be similar 5 to 400 type kind of size.
Yeah.
So in that one at the top left is an example where you've got one house per easement, and then you end up with twice as many handles as what. That's not ideal.
Not ideal, yeah, but probably lawful, but
there'd be no
street
street parking there virtually. Like,
I think Councillor Vorster's comment about it being a body corporate's not a bad one, but on page 490, there's a map that maybe it's not. It's just that's actually not the right one. Sorry, not page 490. Let's just go back to the main one. Was there a reason why we didn't put pathways on both sides of the road? At the moment, there's 13 lots on the southern side of the development, and we're forcing all of those residents to walk across the road to get to the pathway to push their pram or their... was there a reason why we didn't do a pathway on both sides?
Through the Chair, generally a pathway on one side of the road for residential access street is sufficient. The Walkable Neighbourhoods Planning Amendment Regulation 2020 requires a footpath to be at least one side on a new road, and generally that is just what's accepted, just the one.
Is there anything stopping us from putting it on the side where most residents live?
Through the Chair, there is no reason to put it on either side. It could be equally on the southern as the northern.
Yeah, okay. I think on the side where most of the residents live would have been a better outcome, and I might consider a suggestion to that effect later. In performance outcome number 4, it talks about a development protecting and enhancing the character of the local area. How did we interpret that performance outcome in the context of this, so it doesn't seem to protect or enhance the current character, but what does that mean?
Through the chair, the current character is quite varied. There are lots of lot sizes. There's rural residential, there's low density residential, there's rural even not too far afield. It is quite a mix. In terms of the existing character, the emerging communities domain zone refers to the future desired character, the anticipated character, which goes back to that density of the 15 to 25 dwellings per hectare. The anticipated character within the emerging communities is that it's an emerging area that is going to have that more of a dense outcome than a rural residential. And it is unique, this location, that it is surrounded by quite a variety of lot sizes, which does give a varied character, but it is consistent with the desired future intent for the emerging communities domain.
Yeah. The last question I had that relates to this is there's a provision in the city plan that talks about this idea of transition. So between two zones, an established zone and a new zone, there's a transition between one and the other. It occurs to me that we've put the most dense element of this development right next to the rural residential zone that lacks regard for that idea of transition. Can you help me understand why you assessed it in the way you did, given that transition? I don't know, it's probably not a requirement, but it seems to be important.
Yeah, through the chair.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. Which transition provision are you referring to, Councillor?
I don't actually remember the section, but maybe I just can find it here.
Is it the page 468? Is that the one? Sorry.
Yeah, so that outcome 3341 in bracket 6, the transition of vacant urban land and new communities will, do those four things. And then the next one under, which talks about the layout and design of new communities, talks about an internet-connected system of streets. But I suppose they weren't the two that I probably thought of. There was a word that I think related, or there was a phrase that I think related to the strategic framework where the rural residential zones expectations are very low intensity lots, which is adjacent to this site. And I think by reviewing this application favourably and suggesting that these new communities elements, this sort of density is acceptable, where actually we're not having regard for the rural residential adjacent lots. So I suppose I was trying to work out what was going through the planning officer's head when they thought about the idea of transitioning from one sort of development to another, or one sort of zone to another.
Through the chair, the transition that you're referring to was considered during the assessment of the application.
Yeah.
The site itself, as I mentioned, the density for emerging communities is between that 15 to 25. This falls in the middle of that with the approximately 20 dwellings per net hectare. So looking at it from that perspective, it is catering for development that fits well within the bounds of that emerging communities. It's not pushing it to the highest possible extent of the density that is allowable. It's a density that is fairly central to what is allowed. So that does allow for some degree of transition.
But the landscape character in the established community on adjacent lots wasn't really thought about. It was more about what was allowed in the emerging community zone rather than the landscape character in the established community just adjacent.
In terms of the character on the adjoining properties, it's considered that there was that sufficient setbacks, sufficient space between what would be the future dwellings and the existing dwellings to allow for a separation and a physical distance between those characters.
Okay. So, councillors, might just take a short break. It's 12:04, so we can just go and get a feed and toilet break. Perhaps while we're just taking that break, a couple of things that have come up that I think we might try and get the officers to help with some wording on is a condition regarding the marked bin collection area where So what's that, lot 6, 7 and 8?
Yeah,
And
all of them
let's
are.
merge lot 5 and 900.
Could we delete 6 and 7 and make the road head south as
Well-
suggested?
Well, let's
I-
bloody corporate.
I actually had the officers prepare a condition that merged 16, 15, 12 and 11 and 8 and 7 from 6 lots into 3 lots to deliver a better landscape character transition between the rural residential zone and that emerging community zone. But I would be open to removing 6, 7, 11 and 15 because I think that is much more respectful of the current community expectation of how we should interpret the city plan as councillors.
Okay, well,
Let's have a break.
let's take a break, and then in the break, someone can start to... All right, thanks, councillors. We'll reopen the meeting at 12:21. So in the break, we actually got out our pens and pencils. But unfortunately, I think, despite there being a willingness for us to provide an approval, it's probably difficult for us to reach the configuration of the lots and dealing with the issues today on the floor in a suitable way. So I think the only appropriate way forward is probably for the matter to be refused, and we obviously don't do that lightly, but we invite the applicant to continue to talk to council about resolving some of the concerns that have been raised here in the meeting. So on that basis, I'm happy to move that the application be refused. And if I have a seconder, I'll speak to it. Seconded by Councillor Gates. We, at this point in time, don't have reasons for refusal, but in light of the material that's been raised today by us in the meeting, the council officers will go away and assist in the preparation of some substantive reasons to support that refusal. I don't think there's anything else to be added. Oh, Councillor Tozer, you wanted to speak to it?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I'm very appreciative of the committee's consideration and interrogation of the application today, and I've been really chuffed to see us think about the city plan and things like the conceptual land use maps and where it says larger lots on sloping sites, and where it talks about in performance outcome number 2 for the emerging community zone, having regard to established neighbourhood character. There's lots of reasons why a refusal is the right outcome today. And I would also flag that the applicant quite appropriately reached out to the local council and myself back in August before they lodged in October, and they just said, hey, look, can we talk about this application we're talking about lodging? And most of the things that councillors have raised today were put to the applicant in that meeting and said, look, if you're going to lodge something, you probably need to have regard for these things. And I'm saddened that they didn't have regard for that then, because it would have saved the ratepayers' money and the assessing officer's time had they just had regard for those insights back earlier in the process. I know that we've got almost 2 weeks before the full council meeting, and so there will be an opportunity for us to tidy things up, but I'm very appreciative of the committee's refusal of this application today.
Thanks, councillors. Debate's closed. We'll take the vote. All in favour? Against? Carried. That's unanimous. Right, that was our last item. That being the end of the proceedings. Just a short GB from Councillor Vorster that council right to the state and federal governments. All right, thank you, everyone. Meeting closed 12:24.